Right, continue with chapter 13, which remember is sexual reproduction or meiosis. Remember when we have our life cycle, okay, we have a union of two gametes, sperm and egg. When it's time to reproduce, we need to have a union between the sperm and the egg, and that's called fertilization. And the fertilized egg is called a zygote. Again, I'm pretty sure zygote might be the last word in the dictionary, huh? ZY. Anyway, a zygote has a full number of chromosomes because it got half from the sperm, half from the egg, half from dad, half from mom. Okay, so the egg and sperm have half the number. When you put them together in a zygote, you get the full number. And now the zygote's going to go on and start going through mitosis. And remember, mitosis is just sex cell division, where you start with one and you end up with two. And those are going to be your skin cells and your bone cells and your muscle cells and all that. They're just going to be the same as the cell they come from. And that helps you develop into an adult. Once you become an adult, which they say is at sexual maturity, it's not like an age thing, everybody's different. But anyway, when you get to sexual maturity, then the gonads, there's two gonads, the ovaries and the testes. The ovaries produce eggs, the testes produce sperm, and those are going to be haploid. They're going to have half the number. Okay? So gametes are the only human cells that go through meiosis. Okay, all the rest of them go through mitosis. Start with one, and end up with two that are the same. Meiosis, you start with one, it divides, and then it divides again. So you start with one and you end up with four. Okay? And those four have half the number of chromosomes. Okay, so meiosis results in one set of chromosomes in each gamete, and then you can put one set from each together, and then you'll have a full set. Okay? So fertilization and meiosis is, in sexual lifestyles, it maintains the chromosome number. Okay, you want to have 46 chromosomes. Okay, if we were always doubling our number of chromosomes, imagine how we'd have, because the first humans had 46, and then their children had 92, and then 184, and then what happens if somebody with 184 has a child with somebody that only has 92, and it's just a mess. But it maintains and makes sure that our chromosome number is always at 46. Okay, so you've got the ovary and the testes, which are gonads, sperm, egg, through meiosis, okay? And each of them is haploid. It has half the number. When you put them together, you make a zygote. And the zygote now has the full number because it got half from this and half from that. And that's why we get genetic differences. That's where our genetic variation comes from. Because it's sexual reproduction, it comes from more than one individual. Okay? There are various life cycles. Okay, for animals, it's just what we talked about. We have meiosis, fertilization. Okay, but in other living creatures like plants and algae and protista and fungus, they actually can change this. They can a haploid cell can actually develop into an organism. Okay, so they go back and forth. They spend part of their life as haploid, part of their life as diploid. Okay, that doesn't happen with animals, but it does happen with plants and algae and fungus. Okay, so the thing to remember, gametes are the only haploid cells in an animal. Egg and sperm, that's it. Everything else has the full number. Okay, and haploid cells are produced by meiosis. And unless you put a sperm and an egg together, they're not going to go through any cell division. Okay, the eggs will stay that way, the sperm will stay that way until you put two of them together and you get fertilization. Then they'll start dividing. Okay, so the gametes fuse to form a zygote, and again, the zygote is diploid. It has the full number of chromosomes. Once that happens, now the zygote's going to go through regular cell division or mitosis, and then you're going to get more and more and more and more cells, and that's how you get a multicellular organism. Okay, so plants and some algae go through what they call an alternation of generations. They spend part of their life as haploid and part of their life as diploid. Okay, so the life cycle includes both a diploid and a haploid multistage. If animals did this, then sperm would develop into individuals, which is kind of scary because, guys, you produce like 10,000 sperm. Yay, that'd be a lot. But so it doesn't happen in animals. But diploid organisms are called sporophytes. Okay, so in a plant, if it has a full number of chromosomes, it's called a sporophyte. And then the sporophyte produces spores. Spores have half the number. Okay, so a sporophyte, when it produces its sex cells, it goes through meiosis and it produces spores. Well, the weird thing about it is the spore is actually going to grow into an individual. Okay, like I said, this would be similar if all the eggs and sperm grew into individuals. Okay, so but each spore grows by mitosis into a haploid organism. So it's an organism, but it only has half the number of chromosomes, and it's called a gametophyte. Okay, so sporophyte is the haploid. It produces spores, and the spores actually grow into an individual, even though they don't have the full number of chromosomes. Okay, a gametophyte makes haploid gametes. So it's kind of nice. A gametophyte makes gametes, a sporophyte makes spores. Okay, but they'll go through and they'll make all they have to do is go through mitosis, and they're going to end up with gametes with half the number because that's all they got. Then if you take two gametes, put them together, now you have a diploid, and now you got a sporophyte again. So that's their alternation of generations. When they're a sporophyte, they have the full number of chromosomes. They produce spores, which are haploid. The spores grow into an organism called a gametophyte. The gametophyte makes sex cell things, but it doesn't have to go through meiosis because it only has half the number of chromosomes. But if two gametophytes release their gametes and they come together, they produce a fertilized egg, and now you have your sporophyte. So that's the alternation of generation. And I'll show you a diagram of this in a few minutes. Okay, in most fungus, like mushrooms, brachyfungi, that kind of stuff, and Protista, which would be your algae, the only diploid stage is the single cell zygote, which is weird, right? That is the only time that they have a diploid stage. There is no, like when the zygote is formed, it only stays as a single cell. It doesn't go through a bunch of divisions and produce a bigger multicellular organism. Okay, so the zygote produces haploid cells, and the haploid cells are actually what grow. So each haploid cell grows by mitosis into a haploid. So it's like the other one where the sporophyte, the spore grew into an individual. That's what happens. But they don't produce a diploid structure. The diploid structure is the zygote, and that's it. It doesn't grow into a bigger multicellular organism. Okay, so the haploid adult produces gametes, and again, the two gametes come together, but the gametes are produced by mitosis, not meiosis, because they only have half the number of chromosomes. And okay, depending on the type of life cycle, okay, either haploid or diploid. If it's a haploid cell, it can only go through mitosis because it can't produce half the number of chromosomes. If it's a diploid cell, it divides by mitosis, but it produces gametes through meiosis. Okay, so only the diploid cells can undergo meiosis. If it's a haploid cell, it can't do it. It doesn't have enough chromosomes to do that. Okay, so in all three life cycles, they have their chromosomes, and then they'll double them when they're going through mitosis. Okay, but you still get genetic variation because you have gametes coming together. You have genetic material from two different individuals coming together to form a new substance. Okay, so this is what I was talking about with animals. They have, their two end. They produce gametes, eggs and sperm. They come together, form a zygote. That goes through mitosis and the cycle. So we already talked about. Now here's with plants and some algae. Okay, this down here is called the gametophyte. It produces haploid. I mean, this is haploid. These are actually diploid. So they're actually kind of together. They hang together. This bottom part is haploid. This top part is diploid. Okay, this diploid structure is called a sporophyte. It's actually smaller. The gametophyte's bigger. But the sporophyte will produce spores. If you ever in the springtime go look at moss on trees and stuff, that you got that moss, if you look and there's little projections sticking up, those are the sporophytes. Okay, those are producing spores. Okay, those are gametes. Then the gametes, these spores, grow. Not two of them come together to produce a zygote. They just grow, and they grow into what they call a gametophyte. So the green part of the moss, that's the gametophyte. If you want to see the diploid structure, you have to look for a little projection sticking up. And that would be the diploid, which is called a sporophyte. The nice thing about it, again, is sporophyte produces spores. Gametophytes produce gametes. They don't do it through meiosis. They can't. They don't have enough chromosomes. So they just go through regular mitosis, split it in two. But to get genetic variation, this is one plant and this is another. So you get different genetic material coming in because you've got a different coming in from somewhere else, and the two of them go together and they form a zygote. Okay, And then the zygote goes through mitosis and produces the sporophyte, which again, usually lives on. So this down here is the haploid, this is the diploid. They live together. But these produce spores. The spores grow into a organism, which is, like I said, is weird. It'd be like egg and sperm without being fertilized, grow into the individual. But plants can do that, okay? How much time they spend in each depends on what type of plant you're talking about. Here's your fungus, okay? The only time that you have a diploid is right here, this little guy, one-celled, okay? It will make gametes. It'll divide in, make gametes, and you get fertilization. But they spend most of their time as a haploid, okay? And the only time they have a they'll send out, they'll go through mitosis and two of them will come together. This is the diploid structure, pretty small. Okay, so meiosis, its job is to reduce the number of chromosomes in half. Okay, it's important because if you're going to put two together, this has half, this has half, put them together, now you got a full. Okay, so like mitosis, meiosis, the first division of meiosis, actually the chromosomes, the DNA doubles. But then they have another division and it doesn't double in between. So you start with 1 and you get 4. Whereas mitosis, you started with 1 and you got 2. There's one more division to get 2 more, okay? So meiosis actually takes place in what they call 2 cell divisions, meiosis 1 and meiosis 2, okay? Meiosis 1, they're similar to mitosis except you just don't have that doubling occurring, okay? The 2 cell divisions result, again, in 4 daughter cells, not 2. And each daughter cell, instead of having a full number of chromosomes, is going to have half. And that's perfect. That's what we need. Okay, so mitosis, 1 divides into 2. And those 2 have the same genetic material as the one they came from. Meiosis, 1 divides once into 2 and then divides again into 4. And those 4 have half the number of chromosomes. Okay, each daughter cell, again, has half, and that's why you can put the gametes together, because each have half and then you'll have the full number once they get together. I've said that a lot, haven't I? Okay, so the stages. In meiosis, remember we have meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. The chromosomes duplicate during interphase, like mitosis. The sister chromatids, each half of the chromosomes line up. Okay, so they're closely associated along that length, just like with mitosis. Okay. This is called sister chromatid cohesion. I wonder if I have a picture. Okay, so instead of lining up like in mitosis, they lined up in the middle. These guys actually line up so that the pairs, like in mitosis, chromosome 1 would be this way and this way and this way and this way and this way. In meiosis, chromosome 1 and chromosome 1, they join together like this. So you actually have like 4 chromatids together instead of 2 like you do with mitosis, okay? So if you look here, you have, like I said, interphase, they're doubling. Well, here what happens is these guys line up, these guys only line up 1, and these guys line up as 2. So there's actually 4 chromatids instead of just 2, okay? And then once they go through their division, then they do a second one. Like, this is like, the second one's kind of like normal, or it looks like mitosis, because you've got these, they line up and you end up with 2 cells with half. But what had happened here is this one got a chromosome and this one got a chromosome. Okay, so it's different. The first meiosis, instead of ending up with chromosomes with the, like I said here, they separate and you get the same. These 2 chromosomes are going to line up together. All the 1s are going to line up, all the 2s, and not in order, But anyway, this whole chromosome is going to go over here and this whole chromosome is going to go over here instead of splitting. Then they're going to split. Okay, so that's how you end up with you get 4 cells, but now they have half the number of chromosomes. Okay, so again, they line up in the first, we talked about metaphase where they line up in the middle. In metaphase, or meiosis, sorry, I said metaphase, yeah. In meiosis, what happens is instead of lining up single file, they line up in pairs. And so instead of half going, the whole thing. Now this is meiosis 1, again. This is where these 2 guys would be together and a chromosome goes on to each side. They don't split yet. Now, when they